Holla ballers! Welcome back to Undertale, where we're going to do the pacifist run. This is hard for me to do because it's a video game. If the people annoy me, I want to kill them. And I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that. The pacifist run, how does it work in the Undertale? The pacifist run works on sparing everybody. I think the golden rule is never to earn experience. So if you spare an enemy or a creature, a monster, I've got to stop calling them enemies, they will give you a lot of gold, but 0 experience, which leads to the problem of you never leveling up and you don't gain much HP. I think by the end of my first playthrough, I had near 60 HP, but in this game, you will be left with just 20, which means you have to play better. Perfect for like a challenge run, right? And to get more information. So it makes the game a little harder in that regard, but you can have a lot more gold, which means you can buy more healing items, and you can also, which I never did, I didn't feel the need to, stay at an inn or a hotel, which will overcap your health. I don't even know by how much. I never did it. It was kind of out of the realm. And there was things I wanted to do on my pacifist run that I didn't do on my first run, such as send the Thames to college. What does that do? I don't know. I wanted to pick up a bunch of items from the beginning of the game because they pay off at the end of the game, and I didn't do that. In fact, even after this pacifism run, there's still one thing that's just dawned on me that I haven't done, and I don't know what that does. But I know, but this is probably what you're thinking, so I'll address it now, is we are going to do the genocide run, because apparently there's a lot more information in that one, and this pacifism run also added a ton more information. So working through the game, it definitely dawned on me in many ways, things that I missed the first time, such as there are enemies you never ever have to fight. They're all, the way it works is you will go through a sequence of talking to them and trying to judge it based on what kind of monster they are and what they're saying to you. So if there's like a miserable ghost, you might want to make them laugh, and then they will be fine to just leave you alone. But there was a bunch of enemies I killed. I think like the mold smalls, the small molds, that you never even have to fight. You could just say spare. They just happen to be things you bump into. And this is where the game takes a turn. Because you're like, oh, these some of these are just children that I've ran into on my travels. It's not fight. It's just things I've run into. And yes, they attack you. But so there's some gameplay, but that's not really what's going on. I think I was most taken aback by my first playthrough, the mention of a crazy reindeer type creature that was wandering around in the snow area that everybody had been placing decorations on. And the way it's worded to you is the people don't realize what they're doing is actually really mean. And they've taken that to, they found it fun to decorate this like reindeer creature. And now they built a Christmas tree because it was so fun to do that. But then when you bump into the reindeer itself, I had killed this in the past because it looked like a demon. All you have to do to beat it is take the decorations off it because it's really upset. They've put like bags of chicken nuggets on it and wrapped it in like barbed wire made of rubber or something like that. Like they've really annoyed this poor creature that's just wandering around. And all it wants to do is just take this stuff off me because it's awful. And then when you do that, you just feel really bad. Like, oh, they're just bullying this poor creature. So the whole game revolves around that. Now, the dialogue does change, but I think this has got such a fandom following that it was a little exaggerated as to how much it changes early game. They will recognize you've played the game before. So, for example, your first meeting with Sans, where he's creeping up behind you to get you with a whoopee cushion, is in the pacifism run, or your second run, I guess, it'll work on either ways. When you turn around first, and he goes, how did you know I was following you? It's like you almost knew I was doing this. It's like, well, you do, because this is the second time you played the game. The game recognizes you played it before, right? And so you have a few bits of dialogue like that. But the real change, without being too spoilerific of other things I did, comes sort of mid and late game. So by sparing everybody, I did manage to do some quite a lot of content that didn't exist for me in my first playthrough. In particular, befriending Undyne, who turns out to be a really amazing, wonderful character, and possibly my favorite character in the game. Undyne is dressed in huge knight armor and is haunting and stalking you throughout the game. But by sparing everybody, you kind of change her mind on what is going on with monsters and humans, and ultimately you end up, Papyrus actually hooks you up on a date with her, which goes terribly because you're not meant to be, and she's supposed to really, it's hard to tell. She has feelings for like, mainly Dr. Alphys, which is questionable after this pacifism run, but generally speaking, They're all friends. They're all training. She doesn't really love Papyrus. She likes training people and making spaghetti with a spear and splatting everything because she's supposed to be this, like, over-the-top rah, rah, lady. And you go to a house and you do all those. But the real, all that is great extra content. Really fun. And the characters move around and they're now in different locations and they're now working together. So that's very cool. All that stuff was great and started to take shape mid-game. The real alteration of this pacifism run is the lore of the game, which for a game that, again, costs 69 pence is just ridiculous how much effort they've put into this. And it concerns primarily Dr. Alphys. Now, I will say, activating the pacifist bonus, I wouldn't have known to do unless it was for my chat. Because there's no indication, or at least the chat was trying to say there is a conversation that you have somewhere. And I think it's probably if you finish the game as pacifist, but you didn't unlock it, where Flowey, I think, tells you to go and do something else. Because you have this period of time after you leave the core to get to the castle, where it's locked off and the elevator's locked and you've just got to move towards the castle. However, once you go through a certain scene, you can then go back and return to the game. And then if you go back, which it doesn't prompt you to do, you'll get a phone call. And that phone call is from Undyne saying, I have a delivery for you. And new things start happening then. This is when it really takes off as to why this run is so worthwhile and why I want to do Genocide as well, because apparently there's more in there. The truth of the soul capturing and Dr. Alphys's role in it now uncovers after a little interaction with these characters. And it's horrible. It's really dark. Like, it's very up there with some of the biggest twists. Again, I always come back to Chrono Trigger here, actually. When you learn of, like, the disabilities and things that some characters have that's done in a sort of subtle way, or going to Robo's original facility, those kinds of things. Never played Chrono Trigger, play it. It's phenomenal. And you find out that Alphys has a really dark secret that's not mentioned to you. And it's kind of at odds for me as, like, Alpha's redemption arc. I'm not sure that paid off for me. But ultimately you find out that what they needed this powerful soul, and Alphys was charged with this task. And what they did is that any monster that fell down, i.e. was dying, and you do find out about several other characters, including the origins of Metaton, which is really sad. They were brought to this facility where they were injected with some sort of serum that they call determination. And the idea was to... The problem they're running into is you can't capture a monster's soul because as soon as a monster dies, its soul turns to dust. Humans don't do that. They have a powerful soul. And they decide that because humans want to live and the monsters don't, their soul persists. So they tried to force it through medicinal purposes, right? But it seemed to, in fact, just keep them alive at first. And this is told through all this series of events where you're going through this very horrible sort of medical facility where they were clearly experimenting on monsters. And these monsters, you know who they are and you recognize them. They're often the, like, parents or siblings or relatives of people you've met throughout the game who are missing these relatives because they don't know where they are. Especially because as they were getting better under Dr. Alphys's care with this determination, he kind of told them that these people were coming back. Like, oh, we treated them because they didn't die, which is what they expected to happen. They expected them to die and their soul to continue on, but they didn't die. So Alphys let them know. He's like, yeah, your family members are coming back. But then things got worse. And what you have is a very interesting twist of combat and story in that they started to almost dissolve or liquefy into these white globulous creatures and then started to merge together in this twisted amalgamation. And so the enemies you fight in there are like ghostly, but they're also conglomerations of everything you've dealt with in the previous in the game. So you recognize elements of them hanging out. So when you think of those twisted creatures you'll see in probably high def in video games and movies where they're all mixed together and they're monstrosities, that's what you're dealing with here. And it means you can utilize what you've learned on the pacifism run of how to sort of satiate them and calm them down, but you have to do it in multiple ways. So it gives you a slightly more difficult combat because they're using the attacks that multiple 2 or 3 of those enemies would use at once. This was really good. And along the way, we learned a lot of story. Particularly that there are videotapes featuring you, or at least the name of you. So you name your character at the start of the game, and you find these videotapes of the king You also find out Goat Lady was the queen, and they had 2 sons, one monster called Azrael, and a human that had wandered in and they had kind of adopted as their other son. And your name comes up, and you're like, wait a minute. Am I actually their child? Because they didn't recognize me in the first one, in the first playthrough, but now my name is coming up on these videotapes. And you're like, what the hell is happening here? Because the intrigue builds, right? Which is pretty scary in terms of like the implications of what this means. An implication is a big part of the game in the pacifism run because it adds about 2 hours of content, I'd say, to the normal run. And you get to do this very quickly because you can skip most of the dialogue throughout the game because that doesn't change or changes very, you know, 1 extra line or something. As you work towards the end of the game, you get a completely different ending, which I thought was really nice, actually. Really, really nice. So instead of using the souls of the fallen, you go to the king, and the king gets completely slapped by the queen, who finally shows up. The queen is like, you're a coward. Because the rules are, you need these 7 souls to destroy the barrier. You don't need them to escape. You can escape with 1 and collect the souls on the outside. You could have, if you were really meant to free the monsters, you could have taken 1 human soul, got out, and collected the remaining 6 very quickly out in the open world, right? Because a monster soul plus a human soul makes an extremely powerful monster. And you didn't do that. Instead, you hoped and prayed that eventually horrible humans would come down where you wouldn't feel bad about taking their souls. And you actually hoped that no one would ever come down, so you would never have to go through this because you just want the monsters to live safely and in peace. And all this starts to come out. As it then proceeds, it gets even worse because all your friends show up, all the people you saved, because it's pacifism, right? Everyone's alive, and they all come up and start having dialogue until Flowey shows up again. Because Flowey is the evil one, and Flowey takes all the souls, and Flowey's going to burn everything to the ground. And we go back into a similar boss fight to the other one, only with a twist this time, because he's consumed the monster's souls. And they're breaking out, and you have to free them all. You have to save all your friends again at the end, which was really nice. And then it turns out that Flowey is actually Azrael, their son. And the story of the monster taking the child out, Azrael taking the child out to the village in order for him to, when the child died, his brother essentially died, to be at peace where he was born. But the humans saw a monster and attacked and wounded Azrael and all those kind of things, comes to fruition. His like soul's now in the flower, and the flower is twisted, and Azrael has kind of thrown into a rage of what's going on. So you have to, the final boss fight is actually with Azrael. This was very fun, not hard in any way, which I think is a great touch because you have very low HP and you just want to enjoy the story for the most part. So not hard, very much easier than the original Flowey fight, or maybe I just got better, I don't know. But I loved how this story played out, and ultimately you have peace with Azrael, but he will return back to the flower, where he will forget what's happened. He's going to return to being Flowey. But the barrier is down. His last act is to bring down the barrier, which I thought was really cool. It brings down the barrier, and the monsters are now free. I was really worried about this, because one, they don't go and tell the other monsters in the underground that like the door's open now, we can leave. That doesn't happen. I was like, that's kind of mean. But now they're out, they're deciding what to do, and asking you to be the ambassador, because I was very concerned that the humans could just destroy the monsters. And it would be very unfortunate if they all got out and immediately got annihilated by all these humans that were waiting. But they do address it a little bit, saying, can you be the ambassador? But the biggest twist, of course, as I mentioned earlier, is that you are not Gally. And then I think back to the very first time I turned this game on, and I was like, what is the wording when you choose a name? And the wording is, I think people have confirmed it, I haven't been and checked, but the wording is actually name the child that died, that's wearing a striped jumper. And it's all in black and white, so you can't match the colors or anything. And you name that child Gally. And every instinct you have as a gamer is that you're naming your character. This must be you who woke up in the underground, right? No, you're just a different child who happened to stumble in there. And Gally was actually the original child. Your real name is Frisk. Yeah, it's the first time, because the game never asks you your name. Which I find really interesting, is that it's something you never notice, is none of the monsters ever ask what your name is. So your mute, protagonist here never says, my name is Frisk, until the very end of the pacifism run, where they're like, well, what is your name? And you go, my name is Frisk. And you're like, Frisk? Who the hell is Frisk? And it's like, Gally was a totally different child that was the adopted son to the king and queen, along with their real son, Azriel. And it was glorious. It was really, really nice. So I assume this is the good ending. I have to say, having so much extra content locked behind a challenge mode of a game that you already are intrigued to play again. 69p? 69 pence for this experience. Ridiculous. Ridiculous. Now I've played this enough for like, what? 7 movies? Right? 7 2-hour movies, if not 8. I think we're at like 16 hours or something like this for 69 pence. What a value. Absolutely incredible. But now I need to do the genocide run because the word on the street is there's even more locked behind the genocide run. But the genocide run is kind of hard to do. I haven't done that yet. That's where we're up to. So I'll be back with you to let you know what that's going to be. We're also going to be checking out Assassin's Creed Shadows to see if it's any good. I've done a lot of work with Ubisoft over the years, particularly when we thought there was an Assassin's Creed MMO coming, which turned out to be the sort of links between the mini games they were doing. I'm not even sure where they're up to with that because it didn't seem to pay off. They were doing like Assassin's Creed Red and Black and things like that. I haven't seen much on that. But what I have seen is I was kind of drifting out the Assassin's Creed. In fact, I hard drifted out of Assassin's Creed because it got extremely long and it just became like Ubisoft, the Ubisoft game. Collectathons all the time. Apparently, they've rolled that back a lot, and Shadows is getting good feedback, so Ubisoft definitely needs to check it out. So I'm going to check it out, and we'll do a vote whether we continue or don't continue with Assassin's Creed. So we've got Genocide, Assassin's Creed, and I also want to say we're going to be playing Split Fiction probably next week, maybe a little further down the line. There is no rush to it, but I'm going to be playing with the wonderful Nagura. If you don't know who Nagura is, check her out. She's phenomenal. She recently live streamed her skydiving through the Alps. Pretty awesome. Paragliding through the Alps. Good signal over there in the Alps. Better than a city in Manchester. Weird. But yeah, stay tuned for that. All right, guys. Bye.